Hi, I'm Moshe, and I'm autistic.
I'm Leah, and I'm boring.
Welcome to Now You Know One Autistic,
A podcast about neurodiversity in couples, marriage, meltdowns, and making it all work.
The opinions expressed in this podcast reflect the experience of one couple and one autistic.
Nothing that you hear in this podcast should be taken as a medical opinion. And unless otherwise stated, no one is an accredited specialist in any of the many fields that comprise the autism spectrum.
But, as someone who is on the autism spectrum, I feel that my experiences will be very valuable to many of you. Whether you're on the spectrum, a support person like Leah, or just a curious bystander.
If you think that you or someone you care about may be autistic, consult your family doctor.
Hi, Leah.
Hi, Moshe.
How are you today?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. So, what are we talking about today?
I thought that we could talk about the function of physical touch during communication.
Physical touch. It's part of our series on communication, and it's actually an episode that I was kind of excited about because physical touch, it has kind of an interesting connotation when it comes to neurodivergence and autistics. We hear a lot about the stereotypical behavior of neurodivergence. And one of the things that people talk a lot about when it comes to hallmarks of neurodivergency is an aversion, a lot of the time, not all the time, because again, one autistic, an aversion to physical touch. They don't like to be touched. They don't like to have their hands held. They don't like to be touched too tightly.
You know what I've noticed? Often, though, when a neurodivergent says they don't want to be touched, what they're actually trying to say is, I wasn't prepared to be touched. You can't really surprise attack a neurodivergent. Even you, who loves physical touch. If I come up behind you and sort of touch you, you'll sort of jump.
Because it all kind of comes to the concept of an oversensitivity to stimulation. And touch is a stimulant of sorts. And if you are neurodivergent and you happen to have an oversensitivity to various stimuli, then touching someone is introducing a lot of the time sudden stimulation. Or even if it's not sudden, it's a different stimulation that their body has to process. And if you're already over processing certain stimuli, then what you're getting is something that would be, I guess, to some people kind of painful, really.
I can understand it because I've been so busy and overwrought and so overstimulated that if somebody stops me in the middle of what I'm doing to try to touch me or hug me, I've been like, get off me.
One of the things that people often do in an effort to scare people was they'll go up to them and they'll go, and they'll touch them and then the person will jump. For an autistic, for a lot of autistics, it's like that every time. Even if they expect it, that touch is like like a stimulation. And it's very difficult to process things that we're not prepared for, but also that we are prepared for, but we're not necessarily comfortable with. And I feel it almost goes hand in hand with the eye contact and the proximity issue, is having the personal space, the connection that comes from being close to someone, looking at someone, hearing someone, touching someone. The whole social aspect of neurodivergency is challenged a lot of the time by physical touch.
Yes. Also, somebody that you don't know well or somebody that you're not used to. See, that's where I'm different. I mentioned that I can understand being overstimulated by touch, but for me, it's all about the person.
Right.
Essentially, anybody can touch me. Well, not really anymore. Like I don't touch men that are not related to me, but anybody can touch me. And it's the same level of either surprise or I don't want that right now, or that's fine. Whereas I noticed for neurodivergence, it also goes by person. Some people are allowed to touch you all the time. Some people sometimes, some people with permission, and some people it's like a no.
And of course, there's going to be different levels of comfort, different levels of sensitivity. I'm one autistic. So for me, physical touch is actually something that I haven't struggled with a lot. I have, I guess, more of an aversion to it than maybe a neurotypical might. But I've always been a very huggy person. The problem actually has been the opposite, where I'm not as familiar with levels of touch. So I've been accused of being very rough. I used to go up to my friends and just like grab them and like squeeze them.
Yep.
And they used to say, oh, he's too rough. Because I didn't, oh, he doesn't know his own strength. He's a big boy, or whatever they used to say. Because for me, I actually was one of the ones that were opposite to, I hate to use the word the norm, but the typical, we'll say.
Right.
I was a neurodivergent, neurotypical. Oh, whatever. So I would actually use touch. I would overuse touch. I would go up to just random people and just hug them because that was how I connected with people. I like you. You're a good person. Squeeze, crunch, crack, things like that.
You still do that to me.
I still do that to you. And I remember actually, not anymore, but when I first got to spend time, with Avram, you had told me that you had taught him, like, do you want like a small, like a medium hug or a big hug or like a whatever it was that you had taught him.
Mm-hmm. I forget what I said, but it was something like tight hug, loose hug, or no hug.
Yeah, because you have to.
Or a high five or a fist bump.
Right. Because everyone has different levels of comfort when it comes to physical touch.
But then, of course, he blew all my expectations out of the water. And the first time he saw you, basically, he stuck his tongue in your mouth. So I hadn't prepared myself for that.
That is a different story. That is a combination, getting a bit off topic here, of mirroring and expectations based on understanding. If you tell someone, give him a kiss, then your mind will instinctively, your mind will, at least, or the average person's mind will go, okay, so that is my partner. I'm going to kiss them like this. That is my friend or someone like that. I'm going to kiss them like that. That is my parent or my child. I'm going to kiss them like that. If you generalize, as a lot of neurodivergents do, which we do have kind of black and white thinking in certain aspects, I love you. I'm going to kiss you. And to me, a kiss means sticking my tongue in your mouth, because that's what a kiss feels like to me. But that is appropriate for certain people and maybe not for, your parent.
Right. But it was actually exclusive to you.
Yes. I don't know that we've ever actually discussed why we thought that was.
I have no idea.
And I was more surprised than anything. And it became kind of a hallmark of our relationship. We're like, can I give you a kiss? Good night? Blah, And then eventually we're like, Avram, okay. All right. Okay. How about, all right. How about when we kiss, we just do mwah. We don't, that's the kiss that you say for.
Maybe he saw me kissing you like that. Maybe that's why. Anyway.
Okay. But that is an example of physical touch. And on the other side of that, a lot of neurodivergents do have a problem with physical touch, from like holding hands to hugging to kissing to physical intimacy.
Touch, most like everything else we talk about, is way more complicated than it seems on the surface. Because for this topic, we can both discuss why touch is important to people of all types, right? Neurodivergent, neurotypical, children, grown-ups, but also we can discuss how important touch is in our relationship.
Right.
And why it's important, because as you've already sort of teased to people, you're different in that way.
I am.
You actually crave physical touch more than a lot of neurotypical people that I know.
For me, physical touch is very unique because for me, it's a trust thing. Touch is very specific to the kind of relationship that I would have. If you are an acquaintance, or someone that I don't know very well, or even a friend, I don't really feel comfortable touching you, even to the point of shaking your hand. But if I'm someone that is quite close to you, say you are a really close friend or a child or you, or a parent, I guess, then physical touch is not only desired, but necessary. And the absence of it is actually like a deficiency that I feel very strongly. It's sort of a reversal of the concept of overstimulation. I feel overstimulated by the absence of certain people's touches.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way that certain neurodivergents would feel that way about that person's touches.
Yes, I remember something that happened, and it was completely counterintuitive. And then, of course, it was a talk, and we had to work it out. But we were having a knockdown, drag-out fight about something. The topic of the fight, I don't remember. But I was so angry, and I was standing across the room from you. And you just I was screaming, and you were sort of, I don't know, raising your voice. And you were like, how come you don't love me anymore? And I was like, of course I love you. I'm just angry at you right now. And you were like, then how come you're not right here? And you opened your arms and you sort of pounded your chest. You're like, I don't care if you're mad at me. You need to be right here at all times. And I went, whoa, I'm too angry for that kind of contact right now.
Right. Because the connection that comes from physical touch, for me specifically, is relative to the kind of relationship that we have. And a desire, even a temporary desire, to not have physical touch with someone that you have the kind of connection that I expect is akin to a downgrade of your entire relationship. I love you, and therefore right now we are together. We are a couple. You are husband and wife. We are girlfriend and boyfriend. But for that period of time where I don't really feel like touching you, it's like we've broken up. And I feel the loss as though we had just broken up, even if it's temporary.
Mm-hmm. And then when we were calm, that had to be a discussion because I was like, I was far too mad for that kind of contact. And you wanted full on like snuggles. And we would have still been fighting, but for you, that would have been fine. And for me, that wasn't fine. So we talked about that. And eventually you were like, okay, consent. I understand. No touching when you're that angry. But I still always remembered that because it was sweet and sad and a very interesting window into who you are as a person and a neurodivergent person.
It's interesting. And once you know that sort of thing, because everyone has a different relationship with touch. My relationship with touch is actually, it's a much higher priority for me than some of my other senses. My hearing has always been a little bit less sensitive to in certain ways. And in some ways it's more sensitive. My sense of smell is quite sensitive. And
less since COVID though.
Unfortunately, but that's a different topic. My vision's always been terrible. So I've never really relied too much on that.
It's the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen that don't work at all.
But my sense of touch is so important for me that I would sooner be able to touch someone, even if I was, hypothetically, never allowed to hear them or see them again.
Mm-hmm.
To feel the touch of their hand, or other, aspects of them would be more desirable for me than to not be able to touch them, but be able to see them or hear them or smell them.
I can understand that because especially with you and the children, touch is probably also the most important aspect for me.
And it models. I'll just let the ambulance live on that. It models every aspect of my personal life from an early age to the present. Whenever I was upset by something, I would seek out touch. I would hold a pillow, or I would snuggle a stuffed animal, or I would go up to a relative, and I would hug them. If I really, really liked you, I would hug you. When I was blessed to have a child, the absence of their presence was painful to me.
Yes, Abram now is growing up, and he's, I guess if you want to say you're more stereotypical neurodivergent that way, he's a bit like, Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang. He likes touch kind of sometimes, sort of, but not really. And in terms of bonding, he's very much the same. So he's out all the time, and he doesn't spend as much time with us as he used to. And he definitely doesn't touch you as much as he used to. And you're upset about it a lot.
I would even put myself on record as saying I'm disproportionately upset about it, because, and again, it's the same story. I would rather feel him than see him or spend time with him. And when I'm upset at him, I don't actually want to touch him, because for me, it's a connection issue. You've disappointed me right now. You've upset me. I'm not comfortable touching you right now, because it's a downgrade in our relationship. It's you have taken your physical presence away from me. So now I have to take my physical presence away from you. Unfortunately, it is not reciprocal. He doesn't care.
He is not that way. I don't know that he doesn't care, but he's not that way.
Because for me, it was actually really sad, because the way to, I guess, punish me, for me, would be to withdraw touch. If you don't do what I say, I'm not going to hug you, would be far more effective than putting me in a timeout or sticking me in a corner. Because to see someone and not be able to touch them was harsher for me than to touch them but not be able to see them. And it's always been like, when I was a parent, I'm a big believer in attachment parenting. It's definitely a proven science, and a lot of people do believe very strongly in having a relationship with their new baby where the child is essentially with them at all times.
But it's also very interesting because it's honestly usually the mom. Usually the mom wears the baby. Usually the mom carries the baby around everywhere. And I guess it's a practical thing too, because if you're breastfeeding, right, they're right there.
It's definitely practical.
Usually the dad.
Because the mother, depending on where you live in the world, you have the baby. You may or may not have time off. You don't really have the ability until they're a little bit older to put them down. So you kind of wrap them up in you, or you stick them in a snuggly or something, and then you go about your day. But for me, it was, I would see this baby, and the first thing that I would want to do is just hold it against me. Because for me, the ultimate sign of love is to hold someone against me, is to hug them. And a handshake is kind of like a mini hug. So these people that would go over to you and go, "It's nice to meet you." And my response would be, "Yeah, it's really nice to meet you, but I don't really know you enough to hug you right now. Maybe once I have a good relationship with you, I will hug you." And it made it very awkward, because in Western society, a handshake is seen as a symbol of trust.
That's the thing COVID fixed a lot, though.
Yeah, but COVID was a coincidence.
COVID reminded all of us how intimate handshakes are.
Yes. And especially for me as an Orthodox Jew, the idea of Shomer Negia, and I would often have been interviewed by women, and they'd be fine. I mean, there was there's nothing untoward happening. But they would be, "It's really nice to meet you, Mr. Appel." And they would put their hand out, and I would say, I'm sorry, I don't shake hands. And before COVID, that would have been like, "Ooh, I wonder what's up with him."
Yeah.
Now it's like, I get it. And it's taken a little bit better. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know that you do, but pleasant coincidence, I guess.
Yep.
But touch is definitely a very intimate thing for me. And it's the end of every argument that Leah and I have.
That is true.
The argument is not over until she has hugged me. That's how I know it's been resolved. And because that's something that she trained me in. I really tried hard to maintain physical touch throughout the ups and downs of our relationship. But obviously she's a different person and she doesn't see it the same way I do. So now my perspective is okay. So I don't fully know that things are resolved until she is willing to touch me.
I've adjusted my way with that as well, because what we're actually trying to talk about here is the function of physical touch during communication, including arguments. And I have actually moderated myself because I used to not want to touch or be near anyone that I was angry at. And now I might not hug and kiss you. So absolutely, you know that that's when it's over. But I will take your hand or put my hand on you, because sometimes if I don't, you're not listening as well.
And that's something else that we should discuss. The concept of physical touch when it comes to neurodivergence, when it comes to focusing.
So I had to train myself to be ripped roaring mad at you and still be able to put my hand on you. That was, I guess sort of a change that I made for you.
And just to answer any question that someone might have, if you see touch as so important to you, then how do you know that things are still, problematic, I guess, if you are willing to touch me to a certain extent? And the answer is I know.
I won't be kissing you. Like usually the intimate stuff, kiss.
Oh, I know. I can feel through your touch that there's still something going on.
Yeah.
Like I'm touching you, but we're still dealing with it, which is great.
It's better than I used to do.
It's a lot better, and it definitely, for me at least, makes our discussions and disagreements more
palatable.
Not palatable, just adult. Like it keeps me grounded, so I'm like not collapsing in a sobbing mess. I'm like, okay, she's touching me, so we're still going to be able to talk this through. And that helps a lot. I would hope with resolving a lot of our disagreements.
It does. It helps me get through to you faster.
So let's move on to the next aspect of physical touch.
Well, the first thing I actually wanted to talk about is an interesting concept. You know how when you see a movie where, a man really loves his dog, or a movie where people fall in love and you get to watch it, you describe it as touching?
No.
Nobody's actually touching you. But why do you think that that's a thing?
I've always interpreted that saying to mean that it's touching your heart. It makes you feel like something like in your chest. You can't see what I'm touching myself, but you're touching your heart, like your chest. It's like, I can feel that emotion. It's touching that emotion, that connection that they have. It's like I can feel the connection inside myself. It's touching me.
Right. And that's so interesting, because for me, that brings up the whole concept of brain-body emotional connection. Because when you're really upset, you can actually feel physical pain. But when you see something really sweet and loving, you can actually feel physical pleasure, like somebody that you love is touching you.
Yeah. The mark of a good actor, when you're talking about movies or TV shows, or even taking it a step further, even going to listening to particular songs, where you're listening to a song and you're like, wow, I can feel the emotion in his words, or I can feel the heartbreak that she's singing about.
Mm-hmm.
And she may just be very good at emoting, but also it's how we make that connection. When we're watching a TV show, or we're watching a movie, or we're seeing a play or something, and we're just going, wow, like you can see it like in her eyes and their body language. You can see how he's touching her, or you can see how like her, I can feel what's happening between them or something. It becomes that connection, that they're making, that in turn you are receiving from them, in addition to whatever's going on in front of you.
Right. So that's why when you watch a funny movie, even if the person's not there with you telling a joke, you laugh. That's
Right.
why people like romance movies. It makes them feel, warm, like they're being hugged or
Right.
sweet. That's why scary movies are scary,
Yeah.
because we have a really, really strong mind-body connection as human beings that we don't pay enough attention to.
There are certain conditions or mental illnesses that are actually characterized by a disconnect between feeling someone else's emotions. It's like a pathological lack of empathy. I see that those people are hugging, but I don't feel the kind of connection that they have. Or I see that those people are laughing, but I don't understand their humor.
And more people like that exist than you think. Because a lot of people are thinking, well, yeah, of course, they're serial killers or murderers. No, they can just be regular people and they go through life feeling that way.
And a lot of people often stereotype autistics like that. This deadpan lack of emotion where you'll see this crowd of people standing around talking and laughing and joking and ha ha ha, whatever. And then this one neurodivergent will stand there and go, I don't get it.
Right. You very sadly been accused before by one of my friends who didn't know you very well that she actually said she wanted to see in the trunk of your car to make sure you weren't going to murder me.
Right. And that is, unfortunately, it is a burden that a lot of neurodivergents have. And that is, as I describe it, the ability to convert your internal emotions to your external expressions, I
And it
guess.
wasn't funny, but I couldn't really help but laugh at her. Because anybody who knows Moshe and I well, even a little bit, would know that I'm far more likely to murder him.
Oh, I know. You don't have a car or a license, but man, if I made you upset, like the desert,
It's not far.
it's not far and it's a big place. It's a great place to, hide a body. So
For the record, I'm not murdering Moshe, but it's just, if you knew our personalities and knew us personally even a little bit, you would see how ridiculous that is.
but for me, actually, on the topic of that sort of thing, it was a journey because things that are often understood, not automatic by any stretch, because if you can accept that something like humor is not innate to anyone, really. No one comes out of the womb knowing what makes a good joke.
Kind of seems like you did, though.
Yes. I had a unique talent for humor, but it was learned. But when I was very young, even up to just a few years ago, I didn't understand what sarcasm was. I didn't understand what irony was.
Mm.
I didn't understand why certain things were funny, and I didn't understand why certain things were not funny. Auburn is sometimes accused of trying to be funny, but actually coming across as insensitive or hurtful. But it's funny to him.
Exactly.
And that's translating your humor to that other person. There was a lot of jokes made of trying to teach humor or comedy to robots.
Mm-hmm.
People will, with understandably disastrous results. And it's about understanding what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and finding the happy medium between inappropriate but still funny, or ironic but still funny. And that is a complex understanding that is very much related to why certain touches are acceptable and certain touches are not acceptable. And if I love my Abba so much, then why can't I stick my tongue in his mouth?
Understood. I get that. So just to sort of close the circle on the why things are considered touching topic, it really does have to do with the fact that the mind can calm the body, but it can work in reverse. If
Right.
you're having any kind of communication with somebody and you touch them and it makes them feel good, the body can also calm the mind.
True enough.
And that's why, touch is important in terms of something being touching. Does it touch your mind or your emotions first or your body? And it's all sort of reversible and all very important to human development, human well-being, and communication.
Right.
So that segues me into the idea that touch will often complete an emotional experience. So what am I talking about with that? If you've ever had one of your friends, you've probably even experienced this with me, where they're sitting there and they just look really upset and on the verge of tears. And you go up to them and you go, "What's wrong?" And the second you put their hand on them is when the dam breaks and they burst into tears. They needed your help to get all the way through that emotion because they couldn't do it themselves. So your touch would just complete that emotion for them.
It's an interesting concept. And as a neurodivergent, my question would be, why does touch create that emotional experience for them?
For me, I can tell you it's almost like completing a circuit. Remember in science when you had to study electricity?
Mm-hmm.
And, if one of the batteries are missing, then the machine doesn't turn on. For me, sometimes I can't complete my emotional experience without touch from somebody that I love and care about and who I know cares about me. That's like putting a battery into a toy.
My interpretation of that is actually related to my interpretation of touch in general. And it's very much the same as you described completing a circuit. It's kind of like when you are feeling an emotion, regardless of whether it's a positive emotion or a negative emotion, you are feeling that emotion inside yourself, inside your bubble, inside your zone. But when you touch somebody, it's like you're entering their zone and suddenly they can feel that emotion with you.
Absolutely. I used a negative emotion as the first example, but I can think of another where, it's a holiday and you're already really joyful. But when, a man comes up to you and grabs your hand and has you dance, you're even more joyful because you're feeling the joy together.
Right. Or for example, to use a more localized example, if someone, by the way, if someone wants to do this, they're absolutely welcome to. But if someone were to come into our apartment and go, "I'm going to hand you like $1 million right now, or 1,000,000 shekels right now," my first instinct would be like grab Leah's hand and go, "Did you hear that?"
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you're immediately forming that connection.
You're experiencing it together.
And you're going, "This is amazing news. Let's experience it together."
Yeah.
And on a very basic level, it's like, I have a very strong emotion and I want us both to share it.
Yeah.
Or when someone is very upset and you take their hand, you go, "I see that you're very sad. Let me share your pain with you."
Yeah.
And that is, to me at least, why that whole emotional outburst happens when you touch someone, because you're saying, "I see you're experiencing something. I'm now going to touch you. Let's experience it together."
Yep.
Or at the very least, I am now with you, helping you to experience whatever you're going through. It's very much a physical manifestation, there's a big word, of the concept of empathy. You are feeling a thing, I'm touching you now, so in at least a small way, I'm also feeling that thing.
Yep.
And that is why touch is such an emotional experience for certain people. And also, I guess the reverse, where if you're feeling a certain way and someone goes to touch you and go, "Don't touch me," I guess that can be related to in the sense of, I am feeling such a strong emotion, I'm trying now to protect you from it.
Yeah.
Because I am just feeling so much right now that I don't want you to have to experience this. And that, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of other reasons why people would reject touch at moments of crisis. And also, at least for my part, sometimes when you're experiencing a very strong emotion, you are feeling really overwhelmed by whatever. Normally it's negative emotion, because why would you want to protect people from happy things?
Mm-hmm.
And by trying to isolate yourself and distance yourself and stay away from people, it allows you to sort of, in a sense, explode without harming anyone else.
Also, sometimes something so bad happens that you really need to feel miserable for a while, and you don't want to feel better. So you don't want that other person to help you feel better, right?
Exactly. Because sometimes human touch is like a siphon. It like pulls things away, and you're like, no, I need to feel this to its extent. I can't
give you any of my emotion.
I can't give you anything right now. I need to feel this for at least a bit, and then I will come to you and let you take some of it from me or feel it with me.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know. You can argue that that's not necessarily a very helpful thing.
It's not healthy, but sometimes something is just so awful that you need to feel it in order to process it, or it's never going to be processed.
Everyone knows their brain a little bit better than anyone else. And some people process things better in groups. Some people process things better individually. Some people deal with things on their own better, and some people deal with things by sharing it with others. For my part, I actually go with the latter, and it goes back to that thing that I've mentioned a few times, where sometimes something happens to me, and it's kind of like a bowl of cookie dough, and I kind of like bring it to Leah and go, "What do you make of this?"
Yeah.
And you go, "I think you're trying to make sadness," and I'll go, "Oh wow, yeah, you're right. This does make me sad."
Right.
Because if you were not, unfortunately, as emotionally developed as some neurodivergents aren't, then you can feel a thing and act out in a way, but you don't know why. It's negative, it's positive, especially if it's negative, and you lash out and you're yelling and screaming and banging yourself against things and hitting yourself. You're like, okay, so this person's very upset. I want to help him, but I don't know what is making him upset. Let's help him to process. And if someone is unfortunately differently verbal, then you have someone who's like, okay, you know what, hon? You seem really upset right now. Did that thing that just happened make you feel really bad? Is that what's making you feel really angry? You have to kind of be CSI. You have to be like, okay, so we were just in a really stressful situation. Is that what's upsetting you? And even the acknowledgement of that situation makes them just calm down. Okay, now I get it. Now I know why I'm upset.
But here's the thing. You describe yourself as less emotionally mature and not understanding. However, what you really are good at is reading signs and signals that repeat. Yeah. So I have a thing where the reason I just talked about it is sometimes when I'm dealing with something really stressful, I don't want to feel better right at that moment. And I won't come to anybody. But then when I'm ready to share it, I'll come to you and I'll just climb into your arms or whatever. And that is always your cue to go, oh, hon, what's wrong? Like, you'll know. I don't have to talk about it.
Exactly.
And that's you reading a situation that's happened enough to know.
And that comes with experience, because a lot of situations are going to be different. And especially when it comes to touch, couples often struggle with, is now a good time to touch you? Should I be comforting you? Do you want me to hug you? Should I not touch you? Is this where I leave you alone? No, you're looking that way. This is where you want me to go up to you and hug you and go, I'm so sorry this is happening to you right now. Or maybe it's not the time. You just need to be away and process it, in which case I'll be here. But when you want something, I'm right here. I need you to come to me out, like whatever the dynamic is that works.
Yep. So, I mean, that's actually a good segue into the next thing, which is that touch helps us understand the other person's intentions or emotions. You talked about that earlier, saying, how do I know if Leah's still mad at me? I know because I can feel it under her hand. I can literally feel it.
Yeah. It's a bit new agey to say, but when you are as accustomed to touch as I am a lot of the time, then there is a big difference between when Leah hugs me because she's happy and when Leah hugs me because she's upset about something else, and when Leah hugs me when she's upset about something that I did. Like, you can tell the difference, and it could be something subtle, or it could be like she's hugging me and then, like, I don't know, kicking me or something. I don't know. You never do that. But there's always going to be differences. But touch,
People are going to send the police here to rescue you.
but touch helps a person to understand your intentions, because a lot, I mean, and I'm not going into communication styles now, but a lot of the communication that the humans employ is nonverbal, which is where neurodivergents are generally not good. Verbal is clear. What you say is what you mean, and what you mean is what you say, generally. But when it comes to nonverbal, the stereotypical example is, did that thing that I just said really upset you? No, I'm fine. Is a lot different than that thing really upset you. No, honey, I'm fine. Hug, hug, kiss, kiss. Touch establishes a connection, and it establishes kind of where you stand. And it makes the difference between you did nothing wrong and I'm just upset about something else, and you did something wrong and I need you to understand.
It's sometimes hard to read other people's faces, even for me or for other neurotypicals, because your face is going to do what it does. Some people's face doesn't match their emotion at all. Mine doesn't.
No.
When I'm concentrating, I can look really, really angry.
Yeah.
Or if I just forget to be pleasant, honestly, I
forget to be
really, really angry. It's true.
It's true.
You have the same problem, actually.
Yes.
So if you come over to me and give me a warm touch, I'm like, oh, okay, he's not angry or whatever. He's just concentrating. So it's a really quick way to read somebody's intentions.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't include animals in that too. Because when you establish a connection with an animal, you can both, to a certain extent, they can feel where you're at and you can feel where they're at. Because if you're staring, I don't know, I'll use a dog as an example. If you're looking at a dog, you don't always know where their head is at. Sometimes the dog doesn't even know where their head is at.
Correct.
The dog is very suspicious of you. You're very suspicious of the dog. There's a bit of an impasse. But then you kind of put your hand out a little bit, and maybe they sniff your hand. And because dogs have a lot of sensitivity in their nose, the whole act of putting their nose on your hand establishes that physical touch. It for the dog, a lot of the time, will establish that level of trust. Okay, so now I'm touching you. Now we have some connection. And then you can advance to maybe you're putting your hand on their head, or their hand on their body, and you're making that connection. You're telling that dog, okay, you can trust me. Whereas alternatively, if the dog shies away from your touch, or you touch it and you can feel stiffness, or, it doesn't feel warm and it feels very tense, then you know, okay, so this dog is not in a good place. I might want to pull my hand back.
Mm-hmm.
And we teach kids that. We tell children,
let the dog come to you.
Like, let the dog come to you. If you touch a dog and you feel like it's maybe not even before it starts growling or stiffening up, if you feel that maybe the dog is not like responding to your touch, pull your hand back. Take a step back.
That's hard with little dogs, because little dogs can act like they like you and then they'll bite you.
Little dogs
it's really hard.
And cats. Cats will like pat, 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 chomp. Cats are weird that way too. I'm used to big dogs. I've always had really large dogs. So for a big dog with lots of muscles, when you touch a dog, you can usually see if it's feeling relaxed or tense, even if you're blind.
And to be honest with you, the trust with a big dog has to be there, because you have an animal in your home that can actually kill you if they chose to. And it has to be there.
Yeah. So animals are very responsive to touch too. And if an animal will approach you, actually, if you have an animal that will actually come to you, whether it's a dog or a bird or some other animal, you want the animal to come to you, whether you have food or just you're putting your hand out and they kind of want to figure out what's going on. When you have that touch with that animal, you're establishing trust. And just like with a person, when you touch a person, you are letting the person know, I'm here. Either I'm feeling that emotion with you, or at the very basic level, here, I'm touching you.
Mm-hmm.
You can trust me. Which is why they tell people, if you want to establish trust with someone in sales, put your hand on their shoulder.
That's gross, though.
It's gross, but it's a tactic. It's like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
The salesman will grab your shoulder, go, hey, how's it going? Because they're taught that touch establishes trust. It's fake trust, but it's still trust.
That was actually the next topic, so you already covered it.
Well, I know, I'm reading down.
Oh, all right. All right. So, touch can reduce pain and enhance joy.
Yes.
Especially if it's somebody that you love, and you have an oxytocin bond with.
Yeah.
So an example, this is quite personal, but an example is when I'm menstruating and I'm very uncomfortable. I want, cuddles and hugs from you constantly.
Yes.
Because it literally will calm my body down. It will cause pain relief.
Yeah. Touch with someone that you trust or someone that you care about can have a calming effect on the body, not just when someone's menstruating, because obviously I don't. But when I'm very upset, when I'm very anxious, when I'm very tense, when I'm very unsure about what's going on, because I'm autistic. I'm hoping that by episode, where are we at? Like 11 now?
I don't know.
Well, by episode 11, you should probably know that when we talk about now one autistic, I'm that one autistic. So I'm autistic, and sometimes, not just with Leah, but with other people, I don't always know what's going on. Because reading facial cues, reading personal, space, nonverbal, whatever, I don't always know. So sometimes I'm in that neutral zone where I'll be like, Leah, are you okay? Or is there something going on? I'm exhibiting anxiety. I am sort of casting a line into Leah and going, okay, I need to catch something from you. And you can establish that level of joy or the level of comfort, that reduction of anxiety, that feeling of peace by sort of hugging me or touching me and going, I'm fine, Moshe. I'm just really distracted. Or I'm really busy.
Mm-hmm.
Or I just had a really tough conversation on the phone. And before I became more religious, my employers would actually have that. It was like an introduction. Kelly, remember Kelly?
Yeah.
I was very close with Kelly. Kelly was my manager for a previous job for a number of years. And every single meeting would start the same way. Moshe, can I talk to you for a minute? Sure. Don't worry, Moshe, you've done nothing wrong. Okay? I just want to make sure you know. Just take a seat. I just want to see how things are going. You establish that trust.
Yep.
To the point when there were even points where I was having a particularly bad day where she would actually can I hug you? Is that okay?
Very smushable person, though.
And that feeling of, I want to talk to you, but here's touch, and touch can bring a tense situation down to a much less tense or even a resolved situation.
See, it's very different. So, you're speaking about your manager who was a woman and an older woman. So she was kind of, I guess, in a mother role, kind of.
Yeah.
It is very different for me having a male boss coming up and touching me.
Obviously very different. And again, not just one autistic, but one man. Males with female bosses, especially, and again, now I'm going to get into trouble, especially older female bosses, oftentimes the man will view them in like a motherly role.
Right, like you were going to be intimidated by her, whereas the other way around for me.
Whereas a younger girl with an older man who is like, how are you doing? Putting your hand on their shoulder, giving them a hug.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely different connotations, absolutely different circumstances. But for whatever reason, we can talk about the concept of sexism in the workplace or whatever.
Double standard, absolutely, but it's totally real. So
when an older supervisor physically touches or hugs their male subordinate, it oftentimes is in a very motherly, grandmotherly, kind role, whereas the reverse is absolutely the opposite. And again, this is not a podcast on workplace politics. And as a rule, both Leah and I advocate that if you are a supervisor in a workplace,
don't touch people.
Don't touch your employees.
I was a supervisor.
It's really not gonna go anywhere good for a lot of people, and in fact, it may result in complaints.
I was a supervisor, and I really made a point of not touching people.
To the extent that you don't want to touch your coworkers, and they even tell like teachers after a certain grade, you don't even touch your student.
Because, I mean, that's a whole other
thing. But in the day, right up until like the end of elementary school, teachers were touching people. I had one teacher that used to hit a student if they weren't paying attention, and that was expected. The mom would be like, the kid would go home and go, Mrs. Whatever hit me. It's like, well, were you paying attention? Like, what were you doing to make her hit you?
Actually, that happened to you. Again, we've discussed how, we were essentially family when we were younger, and each other's moms took care of each other and stuff. And
yes,
my mom would spank you, and you would tell your mom, Judy spanked me, and she'd be like, you deserved it.
Oh yeah, and I absolutely did, because I was a bad.
I don't actually remember.
But your mom,
she was scary. Yeah,
in her day, she was a scary, scary woman.
Your mom didn't even question. She's like, you deserved it.
Yeah, I'm sure whatever she did to you, you absolutely deserved. What did she hit you with? A stick? Yeah, no problem. You must have done something really bad. Anyway, moving along.
Yeah. It was the 80s, guys. Don't judge.
It was the 80s, and people hit everyone then. We don't do it anymore. There's other ways.
Speaking of children, touch deprivation. Yeah. Let's discuss that for a little bit.
Right.
Not too long, because of course we've already used up all our time as usual. But
touch deprivation is a really, really, really complex subject that they've actually done scientific studies on.
You can Google them. You should, if you're interested.
I think the study that we learned about, or that I learned about in Psychology 101, was it a Russian orphanage?
Yeah, so they didn't do the study on purpose because it literally would have been cruelty.
Oh, absolutely.
What they did was they found kids that were neglected in Russian orphanages, and they followed them through life. And they saw that the deprivation of touch as babies caused them to have global delays essentially until they stopped following them.
Right. And
emotionally, they couldn't develop. They were slower learners. They had mental illness. Even physically, they didn't grow as well, or didn't want to eat, didn't want to,
A lot of these are unintentional studies. There were significant intentional, unfortunately, studies on a number of different things. There's the case of Jeannie, which I absolutely recommend you look up because it's a fascinating case in childhood development. It's always enthralled me. They did a study on a monkey baby that was abandoned by its mother, and they ended up, the baby wasn't thriving. It wasn't eating. It wasn't drinking. It was essentially dying. And the keeper ended up introducing to their habitat a hand puppet, and it was just a hand puppet. It was made of a sock, but the mere fact that this baby chimp or whatever was able to hug this surrogate, puppet, actually caused it to grow and thrive.
Yes.
Human touch, or the ability to feel a connection with something, is actually crucial to the development of children and to the emotional development of people.
So with babies, it starts I mean, while they're in the womb, they're touching you constantly.
Right.
But it starts immediately where if they're not touched enough, it does impact development. Touch has been scientifically proven to be necessary, not just for humans, but as you said, other animals as well. But for humans, absolutely. You can't grow without it. You can't thrive without it. It's hard sometimes to even live without it.
Humans are unique in that a lot of humans will actually intentionally isolate themselves, at least partially.
Mm-hmm.
But there are many animals, in particular, most rodents, rats, mice, gerbils, hamsters, not hamsters. Hamsters are gross. But rats, mice, gerbils, degus, and sugar gliders. There is and again, this is a bit of a non sequitur, but also relevant. There is a breed of marsupial called a sugar glider. You might have seen them. They have like the wings and they fly like flying squirrels. And if you do not keep them in at least pairs, but preferably groups of 4 or 5 or 6, they will actually die. They actually require the touch of their own species in order to function.
Absolutely. But that's why you see, when rodents sleep, they sleep in piles. There's a reason why it's called a dog pile.
Yes.
Dogs will sleep in piles, or they sleep with their masters in the bed.
Most animals will, if given the option, sleep in groups.
Mm-hmm.
Even cats, who are by nature very isolating, will often sleep together.
Yeah, absolutely. So touch is it's a necessity of life.
Right.
So the antithesis of touch deprivation.
Moshe and Leah's Animal Planet. New podcast ideas.
Absolutely no.
Yeah.
You could probably do it just on your own.
Maybe.
So the antithesis of touch deprivation is actually sort of a new theory that people have called haptic communication.
Right. Explain what that is.
Now, the term haptic comes from the Greek root haptikos, which means touch.
Right.
Because a lot of people don't know what haptic means. But if you look at your cell phone settings, it'll say if you have haptics on or off.
Yes.
The haptic is when your phone will vibrate back to you so that you know you're touching it.
Yeah.
So essentially, it does refer to touch feedback.
Yeah.
So what people are trying to do now, especially with children who are neurodivergent, is always include in communication some sort of haptics. So some sort of either they physically touch them or they're, I don't know, in compression clothing or some sort of haptic feedback.
Right.
While trying to do the verbal communication. Because they've noticed, just like I noticed through trial and error in our relationship, that it's a much faster way to get the information in to any child really, but especially neurodivergent children and especially differently verbal children.
Yes. If you want something to connect with them verbally, touch is very important.
And it's an interesting theory behind it. They think that because in the womb, touch is the first sense to develop. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it is the strongest sense.
I have read that.
Therefore, it's required for basically everything.
Right. And including it is very similar to, in a lot of ways, why a lot of new mothers will often calm their babies with the sound of a heartbeat or something.
Isn't it wild? And these are real stories where a baby will come out and not breathing or come out and seem to pass away. Almost right away, and then the mom will hold it because they want to say goodbye or whatever, and the baby will sort of come back.
Right. It's restoring a little bit of the familiarity of the womb almost to bringing a child to thrive. And that is also why in most, at least modern, hospitals or birthing centers, they take the baby out and then they put it on the mother. They establish that touch immediately. Mm-hmm. Or the father. I mean, it doesn't really matter.
I mean, they put it on mom right away because
mostly to facilitate
mom is there
breastfeeding or that. Generally, the baby's coming out of mom. If it's not, then there's something else. We can get into that, I guess.
Maybe not today.
Right.
But yeah, so generally they'll put the baby on mom, but then there's this concept called the fourth trimester.
Right. The first month of life.
Right. The first 3 months of life, actually, where baby is supposed to be on someone constantly because they're not actually developed.
No.
Humans have to come out half-baked because otherwise their heads would be too big to pass through the birth canal.
The human brain is a phenomenal thing, but it requires an extra 3 months to cook.
Yep. Basically, yes. That's why babies flop everywhere and just to kind of look like they don't know what they're doing because they don't.
Because you're giving birth to essentially an almost developed fetus and just kind of hoping that it finishes rising like a loaf of bread once it's out there.
So that's fourth trimester, and we're both big believers in that one at least.
Oh yes, I again back to my love of attachment parenting. If there's anything that definitively states that having your child against your body, at least initially, is harmful, then I have yet to see it.
I have not seen it.
And I believe that the more contact that a newborn can have with both its parents, mother and father, if they're lucky enough to have both parents, the healthier and happier they do. And I know that studies have confirmed, at least in most cases, that the more physical contact the parents have with the child, the stronger the bond. Obviously, there's exceptions to every rule, but the medical professionals and the scientists and the developmental psychologists all agree that definitely as much touch as possible with your newborn is necessary.
When I was in the home, so when I wasn't out doing something else, Raya lived on me for the first 2 to 3 years of her life, and she's still very.
She still lives on you.
Yeah, she's bigger than me, but she still sits in my lap.
Right. So, so where are we?
That was everything that we wanted to cover, actually, about touch, unless you had something else.
No, I mean, this episode was very touching.
Oh.
And we are happy to be back. Depending on what order you're listening to, I was struggling with pneumonia for a while. As you can see, there's been far less coughing and, stuff in this episode. And God willing, we will go back to a regular schedule going forward of weekly updates or more, depending on how energetic we are. But we look forward to continuing our journey with you.
Thanks for listening.
Well, that's our show for today. Now you know one autistic just a little bit better. So something you may not know about some autistics is that we often struggle with ending social interactions. So, Leah?
All right, Moshe, I'll take care of it. Thank you for listening to Now You Know One Autistic. See you next week.